everyone, today I wanted to take a look back at each season of content we got for Splatoon 3 to see which have aged the best for me. This ranking will take into account everything being done in that season, which will include both patches they got, but will not include any base game content, which did a good job. Or patch 9.0/Grandfest/ Grand Big Run, whatever you want to call it, though honorable mention for those, they were pretty good. With that being said, of course, this is just my personal opinion, and it's going to start on the lower end of season, so it'll gradually get more positive as we get to the better ones. But I'm not going to cover absolutely everything that was done with each season. There should be a good summary during the start of each section. Subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started. Now, the two lowest seasons for me are both pretty close to each other and pretty far away from all of the others. So I'm going to cover both of them before telling you guys the order of them. Our first candidate is Chill Season 2022. Yup, the very first one. This was rough, especially in the stages category. Brine Water was a really weak stage that highlighted the issues of linear map design, and while I personally like Flounder, it's a very polarizing stage, and the removal of the spawn tunnel and right walls being climbable drastically hurt the stage, even for me. Even the Salmon Run map that was added, Marooner's Bay, is one of the most hated maps in Splatoon 2 that returned with basically no changes. No real winners here. The new weapons that launched were also awful. Even Snipe Rider was only decent at the start of the game, a shadow as to what it became nowadays. While Splattershot Nova was slandered by literally everyone on launch. I remember seeing so many videos of people calling this thing trash and roasting the hell out of it. And of course, Big Swig Roller was a bit of a joke. The ideas for these weapons were certainly there, and I found them fun, but the state they were in just kind of sucked. A lot of the new weapons in Splatoon 3 launched in a very underpowered state, but these were definitely the worst offenders. The only thing I can really give credit for is that it added 3 new main weapons instead of 2, so there's that. There is one part about the season that I think did age well though, which is the weapon kits. On the season's launch, most of them might have been pretty weak, with the main highlight being Tenatech replaced by Neo Splash in 3 months. However, most of them had a unique identity, were fun to play, and aged well over time, with some of the highlights being Carbon Deco, Zinc Mini Spiling, and Forge. I think even Bucket Deco worked alright, and Custom Junior had a unique identity, which also comes alongside 10 weapon kits total, better than most other seasons. X-Rank was added this season. I don't know why it wasn't there on launch. This was a feature in Splatoon 2. There was a lot of gear added, though most was also from Splatoon 2. For events, we had our first big run, which was on Wahoo World. I think this is the weakest big run. It is not a good stage for the mode, and there was no new King Salmonid or Grizzco weapon, which most other big runs afterward debuted with. Splatfest were also really rough on launch, since they didn't have a lot of the improvements they got later, especially to Tricolor. Remember, this is when if you wanted to be the defending team on Tricolor, you had to pick the team that was winning at halftime. Otherwise, you just didn't get to play it. The balance patches were also really lackluster for the first 6 months of the game. They didn't really want to do too much, and the only notable changes were fixing missile spam, yet another thing that probably should have happened before the game came out, and Viper's horizontal paint buff, which very much defined how that weapon was played. For the most part, the kits are really the only thing I look back on this season, and even those weren't great at their launch. There's a decent amount of content, but the quality wasn't there. Competing with this season for the bottom slot is the fresh season of 2024. Quick disclaimer, this season launched alongside Side Order. That stuff does not count to this ranking, including the plazas. That's paid content. The new main weapons of this season are the Dowser and Recycle, which, next to the season I just talked about, are also some of the most underwhelming for me. Dowser is a solid idea, but the stats of the weapon feel very undertuned, and that's after it got a better kit and an impactful buff. This feels like they were really scared of making another Jet Squelcher after Splatoon 2. Recycle Brella had a similar pattern, taking Splatoon 2's old damage and in exchange giving it a shield weaker than the Undercover Brella. The regen buff they gave it was nice. Tent could shield cycle in Splatoon 2, and Recycle does that for this game, but the shield HP still feels unbelievably pathetic, which makes me think they were afraid of old Splatoon 2 Brella. Basically, I think both these weapons feel like poor imitations of a powerful option from Splatoon 2 that never got to be their own thing because they were too afraid of recreating them. At least that's my theory. The only stage that got added was Marlin, one of the only 2 seasons to only add 1 map, and most comp players aren't a fan of it these days. However, I personally still like it. Yeah, okay, once the map gets into the fan area, it's pretty limited, but the spawn region is good, mid is wide, and the fans are a good gimmick. I think it's way better than most other maps, especially casually. This season has the weakest kits out of all of them. I think Custom Leader was a poor Kraken reference, which hurts when almost all the Kraken weapons added to the game are Kraken references. I've seen like 5 Dread Ds since the season came out, and most of the kits are just kind of forgettable. I think New Squiffer is the highlight casually, and competitively, the biggest winners are Custom Explo and 52 Deco. With Custom Explo needing a splashdown buff to even be decent, and 52 Deco seeing less use than the base kit. I know I've talked a little bit more about comp play with this season, but I think the flaws about the kits and new weapons seem to be because they were more afraid of competitive stuff, which ended up hurting everyone. However, this season does have some strong suits. While mostly returning, there's over 150 pieces of gear being added. The new Salmon Run map is amazing. I really enjoy the rails and mirrored layout. Fizzbanks and new Fest music added a lot to Splatfest, along with a better scoring system. Table Turf added a lot of new maps, even if it didn't add matchmaking or a menu slot like it needed. Emote-wise, the Splatoon 1 and 2 emotes got their unique animations for the weapons that were just copied previously, and while the balance patches didn't do much here either, S-Blast getting a long-range mode that's a bit more forgiving and Triple Splashdown getting its huge buff were both pretty notable. Honestly, the main multiplayer stuff was the lowest part of this season, but everything else was fine to me. So which one do I think is better? After much deliberation, I'm going to say that Fresh Season 2024 was the weakest one. Yeah, a lot of stuff they added in Chill Season 2022 was weaker. However, I think the stronger weapon kits were a much bigger part of that season long term, and there was just a bit more content added in that one that I think added up over time compared to Fresh Season 2024. Up next is Sizzle Season 2023. This was originally infamous for having no bombs on its weapon kits, so I guess we can talk about those first. I think the main standouts were Rapid Blaster Pro Deco, most notably for being like the only good dart weapon in the game, and Sorella Tenebrella. I don't think any of the kits ended up being that bad, but I will always hate the fact that Tetra got Sprinkler of all things. This is the biggest fumble in terms of subs in the game. I can say the kits for the most part are pretty niche. If you enjoy the specific weapon, there's probably something there, but outside of that, I don't think they're going to get many new players into trying those options out. The new main weapons were fine. S-Blast has a lot of potential, and I personally really love the concept between the mode flexibility and the lack of jump RNG and fast shot velocity for long-range directs, but this feels very specialized to my interest as a player. Paintbrush, on the other hand, is fine. We needed another brush for a while, but for the most part, I feel like I've barely seen this weapon, and I feel like they've barely done anything with it. It didn't help that its ink efficiency on launch was horrible. They basically had to patch a buff for this right away in the next update. It also just doesn't help that the initial kits for these were not great. Barnacle on launch was alright, good for the time, but the lockouts were not fun once people learned it. And while Humpback is a fine returning map, the lack of changes made it feel a lot less special, for it was already a pretty mediocre map in Splatoon 2. I will say this season had my favorite Salmon Run map with Jam and Slam and Junction. It was a really fun stage. Big Run happened on Undertow, which was fun when it wasn't low tide, but I do not know a single person who enjoyed playing on low tide. Challenges were a huge introduction, and if they were done right, this would have skyrocketed this in the season's ranking. However, the horrible lack of time slots just killed the appeal of the feature to the majority of the player base right away. 2v2 and high jumps were the most notable ones, and high jump didn't happen until much later into the season. Just really unfortunate. If anything, this season probably has the most notable things in terms of its patches. Big pencil buff, a lot of good buffs to Bubble, Chump, and Cooler, the horrid ink efficiency of Paintbrush I already mentioned, and Tri-Stringer finally got to have explosions at combo, which probably also affected Wellstring later. It even fixed Jetpack. Really, the only bad one is that we also did this with Zuka, which would end up being a problem for, well, I don't know how long, because we're still kind of dealing with it, I guess. I don't really feel that negative toward this season, but there's also not really a whole lot that stands out to me, again, other than S-Blast, which is very much my personal bias. The season just feels exactly in the middle to me. Next up is Chill Season 2023. Okay, let's get the specials out of the way. I like Triple Splashdown. It has some overlap with Reef Slider, but I don't care. It's fun, it's great visually and practically, and a huge improvement over a fan favorite S2 special. Definitely worth it. On the other hand, the best thing I can say about Screen is that the concept of it was pretty cool. I like the idea of messing with the colors and trying with the smoke screen for this game, but my god, this special is boring to use. It griefs your team more often than not in solo play, which is where the majority of people play the game, and it really only feels okay at the highest level, where it's still not even that good. And none of this is talking about the accessibility issues the special had, which were even worse on launch. This is probably the worst single piece of content they ever put in the game for Splatoon 3, and it also just takes up an entire special slot. I think the weapon kits were really good this season though. The splashdown choices were fine, and stuff like Stamper Nouveau, S-Plus 91, and Red Pencil work really well. Even things like Reflux Deco that were not good when they originally came out ended up aging pretty well due to buffs to the main weapon and special that made this kit feel like it has a lot better synergy than it it initially seems. I think the stages were also a big hit this season. I know Bluefin is not an amazing competitive stage, but between new gimmicks added to the map and a mostly faithful layout to Splatoon 1, I think for the average player it's probably enjoyable. And that's not even talking about Robo Ramen, the best Splatoon 3 stage they added. Like, this isn't even a contest. In a game with weaker maps, adding one singular good one is going to be a huge deal. The Big Run map this time was Barnacle and Dime, which is my favorite Big Run stage. I think it feels really nice there on all the different tides, and it also introduced Joe. Really fun fight, feels just right in terms of difficulty. This season also improved the challenge times I just talked about, which was huge, honestly. I got to play a lot more of them because of that. The gear and catalog wasn't a whole lot this season. However, one other small thing about it is that it had the best trailer. This one had so much goddamn style to it, the most since the Kensa collection we've seen in Splatoon 2. This is the only one I can really remember that well, and it's for a good reason. Balance patches were also solid here. There was a lot of midline buffs, which was a good theme for 6.0. Screen got partially fixed at least. Wavebreaker and Inkstorm got their cool changes with new effects, both of which have drastically improved how much I like their specials in this game. Dynamo Roller finally got to have damage comparable to S1 after this long, and all around, most of the changes that happened were pretty solid. This season does have a little bit of low points with splatter color screen, but it honestly has a lot of good stuff in it too. And that's all the seasons for part 1. As you might have imagined, this is going to take pretty long to get through all of them, so we'll go through the top 3 next time.